Yo people, hope you're all well and I hope you've been enjoying the latest patch, whether you're crafting and making a lot of gil or just enjoying the MSQ or extreme and savage content. In this video, I'll be going over some useful changes that you can make to your settings, which hopefully can bring you some quality of life improvements into your daily FF gaming. These are all preference of course, however I've made sure to note the ones that made a big impact on my experience. So legacy movement allows you to use the directional keys to have your character run in that particular direction. So for example, using S would make my character run towards the screen, whereas using D and A would make my character run sideways. So this is a setting that may take some time getting used to. However, when I first made the change years ago, I immediately loved it. When raiding, it's really useful to be able to just move around without having to actually touch your mouse to change the camera. I'd say you'd have to give this a shot and just see how it goes for you. I know a lot of people that have been mind blown at the change and some who have just ended up sticking with standard. Try both and see which one you like the most. Automatically face a target when using an action. So I don't know if this is a default setting now, but when I started playing years back, it actually wasn't. This essentially lets you use an action or a skill without having to actually face the target. It synergizes really well with legacy movement, as you can literally just run around and pop off abilities on enemies that are behind or either on the side of you without actually having to change the camera. Again, this is really good for when you're doing dungeons or raids, as you can just be casting all the time. Cone target closest enemies. So I've been using this for such a long time that I actually forgot it's not a default setting. I went into some fates and actually tried it with ignore depth instead, just to see what it feels like, and honestly I'm actually surprised that cone isn't a default setting. Having this set to cone just means that you will be cycling through the enemies closest to you, whereas with ignore depth I think it goes from left to right, so even if an enemy is far away, you target them in a process of trying to tab to the one that's closest to you. Playing as a melee class, obviously this isn't going to be useful, so in general I'd say try cone and see how it goes. Focus target. So this one might sound obvious, but believe it or not, some people don't actually know that it's a thing. You can use focus target by either hitting Shift and F or right clicking the enemy name bar and hitting focus target. This essentially gives you a small window of important boss information which you can just always keep an eye on even when targeting, and to be honest, for me I've just got used to using it in extremes and raids and also just in some dungeon bosses. Skip playback. So this one is pretty self-explanatory. You'll be able to skip cutscenes you've already seen before, which again is just a quality of life improvement. For example, you won't have to keep hitting the escape key to skip all the cutscenes in the dungeons. Limiting battle effect visuals. So this one is just a personal preference for me. Personally, I find it a bit overwhelming when seeing just multiple skills being casted on a boss in dungeons or raids, or even when just doing hunt farming. Frankly, I prefer the idea of not being flash grenaded every time I line up to kill something. So my settings are set to show limited for party and others. This just allows me to see my screen a bit more clear. You're still able to see animations of important skills, but just not all the unnecessary ones. Inventory settings. So having this set to open all or expanded is honestly just much better than the default. With the default, you can only actually see one page, whereas if you use the expanded or the open all, then you can either see 2 pages or the whole inventory. You also want to disable this setting, which basically means when you pick up new armor or weapons, it will go into your inventory as opposed to your armory chest. It's really useful for when you want to keep track of which items you've picked up during your roulettes, as you can then just sort them directly from your inventory and not have to dig through your armory chest. Something to note here is if your inventory is full with this setting disabled, the items will then just be placed in your armory chest instead. So if you didn't know already, you can actually right click in your inventory and hit the sort button. So these are just some settings you can change if you have a preference of how you want your items to be sorted. So whether you want it to be sorted by required level or item level, or if you just want to see which item you have the most stacks of. So just play around and see which combination you like the most. Sound settings. So if you're anything like me, then when waiting for roulettes, sometimes you like to just be in another window or maybe watching something. So I've got all of my background sounds turned off and I just keep my system sounds turned on. What this will do is just have your whole game silenced when it's not the main window. However, you will still be able to hear any system sound. So for example, if you're waiting for a cue to pop, you will hear the cue pop sound. Idle animation settings. So there may be instances where you've seen people running around and then stop and immediately go into a C pose. Believe it or not, they're not actually typing C pose. There is actually a setting which enables you to do this. So here you can set your idle animation to as high or as low as you want. I have mine on 1, so 1 second after stopping, my character will go into whichever C pose I have active. This applies for both when your weapon is drawn and when it isn't. Disabling recast error messages. So this setting allows you to disable the error message you get when spamming your skills while it's on GCD. It can be a little annoying when spamming through your GCD in dungeons or raids, so disabling this option will eliminate the message from popping up. Nameplates. So I personally keep my nameplates off, and I also have my companion display names off as well. As in congested areas, it can sometimes be a bit annoying to see all the names everywhere. You can just have a look around in the nameplate settings and just play around and see which ones you like the most. I've also seen some people that use the first name and just the last name of players to keep it a bit more minimalistic. Hiding duty list during instance duty. This setting is also self-explanatory, so it basically just disables your duty list when in instance areas such as dungeons or raids. It will save you from having to actually go into your HUD layout settings to disable this. Again, this is just something that I prefer because when I'm in instanced areas, I just like to have a more cleaner UI. Disabling hotbar numbers. So again, this just helps to make the UI a lot cleaner. With the default setting, you just have these random numbers everywhere, which, yeah, it doesn't look clean. So just have these off and it just makes everything look a bit nicer. Target HP settings. So this setting allows you to enable a percentage next to the life bar of the enemy. This is something that can actually be easily missed, and if you're first getting into raiding in Final Fantasy XIV, you might not know that this is an option. But yeah, it's just really good to have this enabled so you can just keep track of how much percentage life the enemy has left. If you didn't already know, there is a way in which you can quick search for items. This helps me a lot as a crafter, as I can check if I have a specific item from anywhere that I may be. For example, if I want to look to see if I have any iceberg lettuces, I can just type in iSearch followed by iceberg, and it will find anything with that combination. You can then just right click the item and click search for item. This is really useful, and honestly I use it almost all the time whenever crafting. Macro for class changing. So with the use of some macros, you can actually have your class UI set up like mine. When I hit a button, mine is set to F10. It brings up another HUD layout which has all my classes on it. This is just a much easier way to change classes in my opinion. For example, if you're an Omni crafter and you need to keep switching between classes, you can just hit this macro and then select whichever class you want. This also just makes your main HUD layout a lot more cleaner because you don't have any of your job icons anywhere. I will actually be making a video on this at some point, so if you're interested, subscribe and stay tuned. So guys, that about wraps up the video. I hope that I mentioned some settings and tips that will be useful for you guys that might be new to Final Fantasy, or even those who are veterans and just missed out on these. If you enjoyed, please like and comment below on which settings were most beneficial for you. Please also subscribe to the channel to stay tuned for more content. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.